myself, I do believe. And thank you so much. I am so glad that you could join us to binge on Fringe again. I am Holly Baglio, your hostess, and I am so happy and excited to have my guest here with me today. Craig Mickel will be discussing climate chaos. This is such a huge honor and pleasure because I've gotten to listen to Craig on CoachDaveLive.com, and there have been a few broadcasts where Craig spoke. And on one of the broadcasts, he was speaking about Noah's birthday and different things. And it really captured my attention. And I thought, since it did that with me, maybe all of my friends would like to hear it too. And just a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure to meet Craig in person at a Coach Dave huddle, Salt and Light Brigade. Thank you, Bobby Lee. And I was able to meet with Craig as well as my other brothers and sisters. David Arthur was there, and Clay. A bunch of people were there, and it was so great to see them, including Stephen Deck. But I had the privilege to sit down with Craig and listen to him and the material that he is about to present today. I am so excited for you guys to hear on Facebook as well as Twitter, and I will get it up on Gab after the broadcast. I will provide or have provided Craig's charts for you as well as links. If you have any trouble getting them, you can always email me at hollybags11@protonmail.com, and I will email you Craig's material directly. So without further ado, I am so happy to be here with Craig. How are you, Craig?
Oh, I'm doing just fantastic. Rest in Holly's favor.
I'm happy to hear that. Craig, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit about your background, like your biography.
Sure. Well, I'm retired now. I worked 30 years in fire and rescue of a large urban fire department just outside Washington, D.C. I reside in Maryland. I'm married. I have 2 children. My wife's name is Pam. I retired in 2013, and I really began a deep study of the Bible. I've been a Christian for many years, but I realized that I read the Bible, but I didn't necessarily understand it. I couldn't understand where David fit in, or where Saul fit in, or King Hezekiah. All these names just seemed to be kind of just pieces of information, but they were scattered. So I really started researching the Bible. And after I got out, I had a little small-time business where I drove a truck, and I would go up and down the Northeast. And I would listen to things. I've already heard music, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. I heard that music before, and unfortunately, cell towers were kind of good at that time, and I would just listen to anything. 12 hours a day. I was on the road. I think one year I drove 80-some thousand miles. And I always have been someone that has been interested in information and getting different people's point of views and kind of bashing that around in my brain and trying to see if, is there truth in this? Is there something to it? So, and that's where I kind of came across this whole thing about the climate change, and made me get into that. I also did prison ministry, did Bible teaching in prison. I taught Sunday school at my church, and I did midweek Bible study. So, I took those years from 2013, and I really amped up my game, if you will, on biblical knowledge and application. And that's what kind of got me into putting together a lecture series I put together in 2019, and I called it Climate Chaos. And of course, if you know anything about chaos and the God of chaos, you know that, Lucifer's not too far behind. If you have chaos in your life, he's not too far away from that situation. And, when we start looking at the climate, you see all these weather events, and, you hear about the CO2, and we're all going to burn up and all this kind of stuff, and you're like, he's telling you the truth. So that's what kind of got me involved in it, and so we're going to talk about that today.
I am so excited. I guess, if you don't mind, maybe the first place we should start is where you started that one evening with Clay and I. You started with the sun's size and weight compared to the Earth.
Right. Well, what I'm going to try to do here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is important. I want to build you a foundation. This isn't about making you a scientist, okay? Because what I'm trying to do is teach concepts, okay? And one of the reasons I gave you other links is I want the opportunity for your listeners to be able to click on links that will help me to understand this. One gentleman's name is Scott Chapman. That's one of his links. And he has a really good, I'd say, an hour and a half, 2 hour presentation. And he's going to walk through a lot of the things that I'm talking about because he was the first one I really sat and listened to. I actually ended up calling and talked to him. It really puts the information in order. You can have a lot of information, but if you don't have it in the right order, it doesn't necessarily have a good flow to it. So, but with, as I was listening to this and I was seeing what was going on in 2018, 2019, and, the Paris Accords, and Trump's getting us out, and Obama's getting us in, and, we're all going to, CO2, and, feel bad about driving your car if you got to go get some ice cream when, you could have walked. I was like, is there some truth to this? What's going on? And the other thing is I began to see that, we started having all these changes in the vocabulary on the Weather Channel. In other words, you start hearing things like, polar vortex. I was like, I remember hearing about polar vortex in the 80s and 90s. Then you'd hear bomb genius. Well, what's a bomb genius? Then derecho. Well, what's derechos? Atmospheric rivers and flash droughts. So it's like all the vocabulary on the Weather Channel was starting to change, and you kind of had to go to Google and try to find out what are they talking about, because something has changed, and people perceive that. So they see the change, but what they're trying to do in the public narrative is combine this with CO2, with the rise of CO2. So that's what's kind of, really piqued my interest in that. And then the other thing, which one of the chat on Coach Dave, he said, people, you drive home and you see like kids got out the night before, and you have to over everybody's mailbox and hit with a bat, and it's all busted up, and you got to go find your mailbox, and all of a sudden you pull into your driveway, and your mailbox is hit. So now it's personal, right? It means something to you. And well, I noticed when I was driving after I retired, I was driving in a Marriott F-350. I was doing these things called hot shots, and I noticed at like 10:30 or 11 o'clock in the morning, I had the air conditioner on and I had tinted windows, and my arms started burning to the point where I actually carried like a sweatshirt, and until the sun would get up high enough where it wouldn't penetrate the left window and hit my arm, I had to wear like an extra set of clothing. So I was listening to people like Stan Dale and Steve Quayle and Lucy Rosebush. People that were talking about how the sun was kind of acting errantly. And I'm like feeling this heat on my arm at 10:30, 11, I'm thinking, do I have cancer? Or is there something really going on with the sun? And so that really said, hey, I need to investigate into this. And so that's what I did. And so as I lean through it, what I'm going to do is just kind of parse to you how I kind of came to understand how the sun was the profound aspect to mainly almost everything in our lives, but especially the climate. All right, so we're gonna delve into that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is one of the fundamental things. As I've listened to a lot of people try to explain this, I always knew the sun. Hey, if I told you, Holly, I said the sun wasn't going to rise for the next 90 days. You would profoundly know that would be a bad thing.
Yeah.
But if I told you, Holly, that the sun is going to cut its output back, in other words, its strength, by 0.5% for the next 10 to 20 years, you'd say, well, 0.5%, okay, over 10 years, that's 5% a year, years. That's not that bad. So the sun's going to get back maybe 90% in its strength. Well, that's okay. That's not that bad. No. That's the wrong way to think of this. And the reason it's the wrong way to think of this is you have to understand that not the size of the sun, but we need to talk about the mass of the sun. And we need to get our terms really defined tightly with precision. Okay, so let's look at the sun and what makes up our solar system. Okay, because this is what we're going to compare the mass to. We're comparing the mass of the sun in our solar system. So what is our solar system? Our solar system is the sun and 8 planets, 9 if you count Pluto. Right? So you have the sun, then you have Mercury, then you have Venus, then you have the Earth, third rock from the sun, that's Mars. You have the asteroid belt, okay, which is very unusual to begin with. Then you have Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and then Pluto. So that's what consists of our solar system. What's astonishing to understand it is the mass, okay? When I went to high school, right, I go to science class. I wasn't the best in science. I was good at math and stuff like that. Science I understood, but I didn't. There was a profound interest in it. But the teacher would stand in front of the periodic table of elements, and everything had atomic weight to it. Each one of those elements had a weight attached to it. Okay, so this is what we need to understand. Anything that is an element has weight. The sun has 99.83% of all the mass of the whole solar system. That's the planets included. Okay? So what I like to do is, as we're going through this, I have a thing called numbers lose locality in our reality. And we know that's a big number, but we need to build a mental image in our mind, okay, to help us understand this, okay? And I think that this will help you understand that the next time you look at the sun, you'll see it. If we were to take a dollar bill that has 100 pennies, let's say we're familiar with 2 rolls of 50-cent coins, right, that you're going to take to the bank, right? We're going to make that our 100%, okay? And so we're going to sit here at the kitchen table, and we're going to count out 99 pennies, and we're going to take our left hand, and we're going to push it to one side. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take 1 penny, and we're going to smash that into 100 equal pieces. 1 penny, 100 equal pieces. I'm going to take 83 of those pieces, and I'm going to put them to the left with the other 99 pennies there. So the rest of the solar system, in mass, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, they equal in mass 17 100ths of 1 penny in size. Okay? So what's that tell you? All the mass rests in the sun. And so I have the saying, I said, if the sun has a hiccup, the earth catches the flu. Alright? Because whatever little tiny variations happen on the sun have profound impacts on earth in weather, in volcanoes, in earthquakes. We're going to get into that, okay? So that's what we need to do. So Holly, I'm going to give you just one more image, okay? Say, I've met you, and I don't know anything. I mean, you're supposed to talk to women about their weight, but let's just say you weigh 150 pounds, okay? To give you an image, if I was to make you the Earth, and I needed to compare your size at 150 pounds in mass to the sun, everybody's familiar with Air Force One, that big 747 that the president gets on, right? You familiar with that? So you see the president walk up that plane, how tiny it is.
Wow.
To compare you being the Earth to making out the sun, I would need 50 747s to compare you in mass to the sun. Right?
Wow.
Right. 50 of them, okay? And they're probably at least, I would say they're at least 200 feet long. I didn't, do the math, but you're almost talking about 2 miles long of 747s. Okay? And think of it, each one of those 747s had their engines roaring, getting ready to take off, all that thrust size. Okay? Size does not necessarily equate with mass. Now, the sun is bigger than we are, okay? But it's the mass that we need to get this concept in. So if I wanted to make a model to give you an idea, how do you compare the sun in size to the Earth? If you would take a basketball, a globe, which is kind of like what the sun looks like, and then you would take a kernel of corn, like you would get popcorn if you're getting ready to pop. If you take that kernel of corn and you compare it to a basketball, that would be the size of the sun being the basketball to the Earth. Okay? So you can see that. We're starting to build these mental images, all right? Now, if I wanted to kind of compare, if I was going to look at, what's the orbit of the Earth look like in this model? We're almost kind of going back to school and making a science model, right? If I was to take the basketball and put it on a 50-yard line of a football field, and I went from the 50-yard line to the 17-yard line, where that's where they win the football out, when they kick it and they don't run it back, they go to about the 20-yard line. That would be the distance that would be that kernel of corn on the 17-yard line to the 50-yard line in the football field. That's how far. We're actually 93 million miles away from the sun. Okay? But to make a scaled model, and you'll see this, like sometimes you might see a car, it's 132, like a 65 Mustang, it's 132, so it's 132 on scale. That's the scale and the distance of the Earth is the sun. But you remember that we go around the sun, right? Over 365 and a quarter days. To take that kernel of popcorn and go out into the stands and then go back into the opposite side team's 17-yard line, back around the stands again, that's the orbit in size of the Earth around the sun. And that's how small we are to it. Okay? So now we have this working model in our minds that tell us, okay, we understand that the sun has all the mass, and we understand that we're very, very tiny, and we're actually, in the scale, we're 93 million miles away, okay, which seems like it's a long distance, okay, but when we start getting into, we talk with Mark about electromagnetism, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, okay, in the electromagnetic realm field, that's very close, okay, that's very, very close. So that's the first thing that we need to understand the sun. The next thing that we need to understand about the sun is the sun, like everything in nature, has cycles. Okay? So let's just think about this. We have daylight, we have nightfall, right? We have the moon that goes from waxing to waning. That's the cycle. The tides are tied in with the moon. We got high tide, we got low tide. We have winter, spring, summer, fall. We have women who have a menstrual cycle, right? 28 days, right? And Holly, I got a question for you. Do you know men have cycles too? Did you know that?
I'm sorry.
Do you know what cycle I'm talking about? Men have cycles too.
Yes.
Are you familiar? Do you know what cycle that is for men?
No.
It's called
I'm sorry.
the midlife crisis, and you go buy a motorcycle.
Yes, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I'm sorry. Forgive me, oh boy. I've had a midlife crisis, Craig, so that's probably why I couldn't answer the question right then.
So what I'm just trying to point out in this whole discussion is everything in nature has cycles, and the sun has a cycle too. And that's where most people, they look at the sun, they know it's, somehow they don't realize all the mass is up there, but they know it's up there, it's bigger than we are. And that's pretty much what about 95% of the people walking the planet understand it. They know if it went away, it would be a bad thing. But what happens in the sun about every 11 years is it flips its magnetic poles. So we're not familiar with a compass. You put a compass out, it points to magnetic north. That takes us up to around the area of the North Pole. You take this compass another way, the south. That takes you to the South Pole. Mariners used that back in the day as one of their navigation tools. Okay. So what happens with the sun is the sun starts at a point where its magnetic energy is very strong at its poles. And over that 11-year period, the magnetic fields start to wander towards the equator. Now, they don't have to go all the way to the equator to actually flip, okay? They just start getting into proximity, and then there's a point where the magnetic fields actually switch. And what they noticed is scientists found out that this was done on an average basis of 11 years. That's one cycle, okay? Now, sometimes it doesn't happen 11 years to the day. Some cycles can take 10 years. Some cycles take 12. Some cycles take 9.5. Some take 12.5, okay? So the duration is we never know until it's over with, okay? But what they did is they averaged it out and they said it takes about 11 years is the average time. So it flips its pose, okay? So that's an important piece of information to put into the pot here, okay? The next thing that you'll hear, and if you start listening to some of this stuff on site, you'll hear solar minimum and you'll hear solar maximum. And he's like, okay, well, what's solar minimum and what's solar maximum? Okay. Well, the sun, all right, it's always up there every day, right? But its strength actually changes during this 11-year period. What do I mean its strength? Okay. Well, we can't stick a probe in it like you do like if you're taking somebody's temperature, okay, or like you're checking your turkey or something like that. You can't stick a thermometer in it. And so we do have, nowadays, we have some other ways to diagnose what's going on inside the sun, okay? Because obviously we can't, we have no means to necessarily register it. But back in the day, about 400 years ago, what they did is they were registering the activity of the sun that's going on by the number of sunspots, okay? So let's back up a minute. Let's understand how do sunspots correlate with what's going on the inside of the sun, right? And this is the best illustration that I have to that. Think of sunspots as respirations, okay? So at night, when you're asleep, your breathing rate is at a slow rate. There's actually people that have problems with a thing called sleep apnea, right? So you go in, if you get tested for sleep apnea, the average breathing rate for someone at rest is somewhere around 8 to 12 times a minute. And if you're sleeping, it probably can go down to 6. But what happens with sleep apnea? People actually stop breathing for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and then something internally tells them, hey, breathe, all right? And of course, that interrupts your sleep period in your REM, right? So they give them CPAP machines to put a constant pressure of oxygen in your lungs, right? So they'll get a better night's sleep. So the thing is that your breathing rate really drops. I mean, you never die, do you? Well, some people actually do die from sleep apnea, but most people don't. They just have disrupted sleep. Okay? So think of that as like the sun. When you don't have a lot of sunspots, there's not a whole lot going on. But now you get up out of bed, get your cup of coffee in the morning, you go out and you run 2 miles. Well, what's your breathing rate there? You can be breathing 30 to 40 times a minute, once every 2 seconds. Well, what's going on there? Well, there's a lot of activity in your body going on. It's pulling the demand of oxygen, so you have to breathe faster. So when the sun has lots of sunspots, there's lots of activity going inside that sun. And that's the gauge that you need to consider these sunspots in. Okay? So, have I lost you yet? And is there any questions or anybody typing in anything? I don't want to.
No, actually, Craig, you're great. I'm following you and taking notes. So far, no one is commenting in the chat, but I was able on FringeRadioNetwork.com to be able to put your links. You had, I believe, 7 links for videos and articles. I was able to put them in the chat room. I was not able to give them your 3 charts. But, however, Jeffrey from Nevada says greetings. And greetings, Jeffrey. It's great to see you. And also shout outs to Stephanie because I know she's listening in and dying to talk. But anyway, so Jeffrey says hi.
back to this, we're correlating sunspots with the activity that's going on inside the sun. And the thing is they really started seeing sunspots in areas where they could really study them back in the 1600s because of an invention by Galileo, which was a telescope, right? And, if you think about scientists, what do? They're always trying to figure things out. So they were looking at the sun, and they noticed these little dark spots. And they noticed they would come, they'd stay for a few days, or they might stay for 2 weeks, and then they go away. So this is what the scientists did. They drew a little circle representing the sun, and they put a sunspot, and they put a date, how long it did, where it was, was it in the northern pole, was it towards the equator, was it in the west side, okay. That's how scientists are. They're very particular about their data. So what they noticed is that during these 11-year periods, there would be periods where there were hardly any sunspots. And all of a sudden they start creeping up, and they get more and more and more. And they noticed, wow, the sunspots would start kind of like towards the equator, but then they kind of meander down, the sunspots would start towards the poles, the North Pole and the South Pole, okay? But they start meandering down over this 11-year period, just about to around the 5.5-year period, and then all of a sudden, they kind of start decreasing in number, and then they go away. And you're like, wow, that's kind of an interesting pattern. So here's the next thing that we need to understand about the sun, okay? The sun has this 11-year period, okay, and they call it a Schwab cycle, okay? But we need to think of it in our mind, and I like building images in our mind because you'll remember the images. You might not remember the words, but you'll remember the images. Just like if you go and you meet someone, you'll know their face, but you always forget their name, right? Because we're visual. So I don't have the visual aids to put in front of you, but I can build a picture in your mind, and that's what I'm trying to do. If you think of when you were born, okay, let's call that the first day that you came out, right? And then go to your 11-year birthday, right? When you're born, you're in solar minimum. What happens is at the midpoint, which is 5.5 years, you're at solar maximum. And then as you go from 5.5, you start going back down in the number of sunspots to your 11th birthday, all right? So if we were to kind of chart this out in time, okay, you go from 0 to 5.5 back to 11. 11-year solar minimum. From 11, you go 5.5 years. Now you're 16 and a half. You're at solar maximum. Then you go down and you go to 22 years old. Now you're back at solar minimum. Okay? And then, you continue this cycle, from 22 to 33. At the 27th point, you're at the maximum, you're at the midpoint. So at 11 and 22 and 33, you're always at solar minimum. Okay, on multiples of 11. All right. Now, what scientists started to do is they looked at the 11-year cycle, but what they started doing is they started comparing the 11-year cycle to the 22-year cycle to the 33 years. They started grouping these cycles together, right? And they started making comparisons. That's what scientists do, all right? And what they found out is that, wow, some cycles we had lots of sunspots, and others we didn't. Some cycles they actually went up, all right, and others they went down consecutively. So the way I want to illustrate this is with something that we're familiar with. Most people tend to have some money in the stock market, right? And you invest it. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to give you an example here. I'm going to say, you graduate from high school and your parents give you $1,000 to invest. All right? So when you're 20 years old, I'm going to go on 10-year cycles because it's a little bit easier to understand the example I'm trying to explain here. They give you $1,000. Over the next 10 years, the person that you invested, this one company, we're going to stay with the same company, they got 100% return on your money. Well, that's good. I don't have $1,000 anymore. I got $2,000. Looking good, right? Now, from year 10 to the year 20 in your investments, okay, it drops down 50%. So for that 10-year cycle, you didn't gain anything, you lost 50%. So if you lose 50% of $2,000, guess what? You're back to your $1,000 again, aren't you? So you haven't gained anything, and you then we go into the next 10-year cycle. And that 10-year cycle, you go up 50%. You're back into positive money, right? So at the end of that 10-year cycle, you have $1,500. You're like, at least I didn't go backwards. Now, when we get to this last cycle, what happens? I lost all my money. I didn't lose all my money. I lost 50%. I went back down. I lost all my gains. So now I lost 50% of my $1,500. But 50% of $1,500 is what? $750. So at the end of 40 years of investing money of going up and going down, I've actually lost $250. This is what happens with the sun. The sun, and we have to look at the output of the sun. All right, we have to look at the energy that's coming out of the sun, because the earth does not create energy; it receives energy. All right, our heat, our growth, all that is received from the sun. Remember, it's 100% of the mass. Okay, I can't emphasize that enough. It's 100% of the mass sources. So it's a cumulative effect on the earth, and sometimes these cumulative effects take several 11-year cycles to see the ramifications. All right, does that make sense?
Yes, but I don't mean to interrupt you, Craig. I'm not quite sure where to fit these questions in, but I have to, and I'm just going to ask them, and you decide when you want to answer them. But the first question is, the city government is making it difficult to net meter. Any suggestions? The second question is Revelation.
Sorry, what was the first question?
The city government is making it difficult to net meter. Any suggestions?
I can't hear the last word. That's not net. I hear like net meter. I'm sorry.
Yeah, net, N-E-T, meter, meter, M-E-T-E-R.
They're asking them about a meter.
Yeah, Jeffrey asked a question. I'm probably wording everything wrong.
I'm not sure what kind of meter you're asking. I mean, like an electric meter?
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Well, I will give Jeffrey some time to respond. And Jeffrey and Craig, I apologize. There is a second question posed, and in Revelation chapter 5, verse 12, refers to what we are not experiencing. Yes or no?
Okay, well, let me look it up here. I have these things right in front of you.
I'm looking it up too.
Okay, Revelation 5.
Verse 12.
In Revelation 5, verse 12, saying with a loud voice, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing." I'm not sure if that's related to the sun.
I don't know. I'd have to read the whole entire chapter and then go before Yud-Heh-Vav.
And every creature is in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, such in the sea, and sun are all in them. So I'm not sure. I mean, there are a lot of references to the sun in Revelation, and we are going to get into that like next week. We're going to talk about how the sun is going to be used as, I believe, a tool of God to bring about judgment. And we're going to understand a little bit of the science of the connectivity. You know, that's kind of what we're doing here today. We're trying to build up this relationship so we understand how the sun interacts with the earth and how it has done so in history. Okay, and so we're getting this foundational point of understanding. You know, all the math sits in there and these little variations, and sunspots is one of the tools that we use to diagnose what's going on in the sun. So it's going to be the sunspots are going to be our meter. It's going to be one of our evaluating tools to see how the sun is doing. Just like I was trying to kind of correlate that with respirations, okay? So when you go to these websites that I kind of give you to and they talk about the sun, they're going to talk about sunspots, and you're going to be like, oh, okay. You're going to understand the relationship of what they're saying, okay? Because there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's tons of things we can talk about the sun. We can talk about thermal mass ejections. We can talk about solar flares. I mean, there's tons of things to talk about. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to use, as we put out these charts, the thing that I gave you, we're explaining these charts. You know, anybody can put a chart up of a bunch of information, but if you don't understand what information they're trying to relay, it's not going to have, you're not going to understand what they're trying to convey.
Craig, I don't mean to disrupt you, but would you mind speaking up just a tad bit louder? Forgive me.
Sure.
Because you are on my cell phone speaker, so I do apologize. And sorry, Johnny, for making your work harder for you. Also, going back, it was Revelation chapter 6, verse 12, not 5. And hello, Kimberly. But I'm sorry to interrupt you, Craig. But yeah, if you don't mind, just make sure you're nice and loud in that speaker. I apologize.
That's not a problem. I'll read it, and I'll comment on it, and we'll get to this. We're going to get to this really next week.
Sure.
I just mentioned it. It says, I looked, and he opened up the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black, as in sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood, and the stars of heaven fell on the earth, as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. And it says, the sky receded and rolled up. Okay. I think the short answer to that question is earthquakes are actually caused by magnetic anomalies of the sun. Okay, we receive different types of energy from the sun, and the Earth has to react to it, and it causes an earthquake. There are some things internally that the Earth can cause an earthquake, but a lot of the earthquakes are received because the sun is kind of like a capacitor, if you want to call it that, or a battery. Right? It receives cosmic and galactic radiation and energy from the sun, but it also gets from other stars. And I'm going to talk about the 2004 Indonesia earthquake next week and what caused that. That was not an errant event. That was from a black star that took, I believe it was 7,500 light years to get here, and it hit the Earth, and that was the reaction of the Earth. Okay. But the point being is when the Earth has earthquakes, and there are actually 52 active volcanoes going on right now in the Earth, which is very unusual amount. A lot of volcanoes that have been dormant for 800 years. And we're going to talk about these cycles because these cycles come in time frames, all right? And that's what I was kind of trying to get to here. Is they shoot up volcanic ash, and when it starts getting in the 50 to 60 to 70,000 range in our stratosphere, those particles stay up there, and they actually become clouds. All right. So if you're having lots and lots of earthquakes and volcanoes and shooting up there, you could literally have and it did happen in 1816. You could literally not really see the sun, and I believe that's what it's referencing about. So, but we are going to get to that in biblical prophecy, but that's probably going to be till next week, okay? We will talk on some of those things about historically, all right? Because what we're doing here is I'm building the first part of it up, and we're getting ready to get past this part of what the sun is, and we're going to start to see how these patterns, okay, actually fall into graphs of what they call grand solar minimums, all right? So I want to get the terminology, so when I'm talking to them, I say, hey, what's grand solar minimum? You know what I'm talking about, right? Because if you haven't really studied some of this stuff, it's just going to be a bunch of verbiage, but you're not going to know how to parse what I'm trying to tell you. So you're not going to get the full impact of what I'm trying to relay to you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So getting back to what I was just trying to say, my example of the money was to show you over 40 years, all right, you didn't lose money consecutively every year. You had ups and downs, is what I'm trying to say, all right? And what we need to think about is we need to think about the Earth, all right, as like a big pot of water. Like, say you have 10 people coming over for spaghetti, right? And, you get the big 40-quart pot of water, and you put it on top of your stove. Well, how long does it take for that big pot of water to warm up to a boil? It takes a long time. It may take 25 minutes, 30 minutes, right? And so this is how you have to think about the sun and the Earth. These events, that I'm talking about take many, many, many cycles to see effects on the earth, right? So just as that big pot of water takes maybe 25, 30 minutes to heat up to a boil, if you were to turn the top of the stove off, to get it back to 60 degrees where it started at, it might take another hour and a half to 2 hours, right? So these things are very slow in time, right? It's not a one-to-one ratio. Oh, the sun's warm today. Well, tomorrow it's going to be warm. No. It's the cumulative effect. Just like somebody who works as takes X-rays, right? What do they wear? They wear a radiation badge, and they wear that badge day in, day out. That's their badge, because what it does is it takes the accumulation of the amount of radiation that they're exposed to each year, and then they document it in that person's job file, so they know exactly how much radiation dosages they've been exposed to over time. And this is how you have to think about the sun. So what happens is when I say grand solar minimum, I'm talking of 3, 4, or 5 years of reduced sun activity over time. That doesn't mean in that 40 or 50 years that the sun didn't have a good run. It might have had a good 10-year period in there. But if you take 4 or 5 of these 11-year periods, all right, and you put them together over time, they are consistently less output of the sun. And just like you went down from $1,000 to $750, okay, it's the same amount with the sun. And so the earth starts to cool, all right, and that's what happens. And so what's happened with this whole thing about the CO2 debate, we're gonna knock this out real quick, and then we're going to start going into how this has affected the history, okay?
Sure.
So some of the most warmest periods of the sun over the last several thousand years have been from 1900 to 2000. Okay? So over that 100-year period where you and I were born, and a lot of people in this world were born, were some of the most active points of the sun. So the global warming has to do with the way the sun was acting. It has nothing to do with the amount of CO2 that's in the atmosphere. Okay? And this is part of the New World Order and the agenda people here. Okay? This is the Biden administration. This is the Obama. This is the Al Gores. All right? What I'm telling you is they know this information. All right? If I'm just an old retired fireman, I can figure this out. Trust me. They know. But what they're doing is they're usurping the truth for an agenda. And of course, that's about power and dominance and control. And that's what the Paris climate accords are all about. And that's why Trump got out, and that's why they hated him. I mean, that's one of many reasons. But he's like, he knows. If you even look at some of the statements that he said, oh, it's going to be getting cooler sooner. I mean, he said it on the lowdown in interviews. I mean, he didn't really burn it out in the middle of, a presidential speech. But they know, all right? And they're using this to usurp global authority over people. And that's why this is important. So when we look at the CO2, let's go back to the whole thing where we went. Remember I told you all the mass is in the sun? Well, you can go to Google, and all you have to do is say composition of air, and it comes up 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. I've already accounted for 99% of the air. So where's all this CO2 in that number? Well, CO2 is what they call a trace gas in our air. It's 0.4%. So let's go back to our dollar bill on the table here, right? Take 99 pennies over there, then take 1 penny and cut it into six equal pieces, right? And take 6 of those equal pieces, and all you're left with is 4 out of 10 pieces of 1 penny. And out of that, out of the 4 tenths of 1 penny, man's contribution, in other words, the cars that you drive, the electrical generation, the cow farts, whatever you want to it, 97% of the CO2 that's produced that is made naturally. say from the oceans account for 70% of the CO2 produced. Right? And so what I'm telling you is they're telling you a lie. They're telling you that if you have an SUV, like Greta Thunberg, you're killing me. That's what these kids are doing. You're killing me, okay? And what I'm trying to tell you is, it's infinitesimally small. Just like you're standing in front of 50 747s and mass, the amount of CO2 that man contributes is negligible. The impact, it has no impact. Does it have a impact? Yes, it has a impact. But it's irrelevant. It would be like this, Holly. Say you're getting ready to go to you're going to file for bankruptcy, and you stop and you get a cup of coffee for $1.50. Is $1.50 you spent going to cause you to go into bankruptcy? No. I mean, technically, if you put that $1.50, but it wouldn't have made a difference, right? It wouldn't have paid off your $100,000 in debt that caused you to go. It's irrelevant, is what I'm just trying to say. If you're taking that narrative and you're making a lie out of it, and you're using it for nefarious purposes, everything that has to do with global warming has to do with the sun, because 100% of the mass of the solar system basically rests in the sun. All right. So, does that make an argument for not believing in CO2?
I believe so. Yes.
I mean, yeah. Just look at the numbers. The numbers basically tell you that. All right. So what's interesting, when I found all this out, and I said, well, gosh, the sun has really, really, these big, profound effects. I started looking at sunspots over time, but I started looking at sunspots not over 11 years, but over hundreds of years. And that's some of the charts that I sent you. So there's one chart that I sent you. It says the yearly average sunspot numbers. All right, so since your readers don't have a visual on this, if you have a graph, you have a north-south, right? Like a XY axis, right? And so on your left, you have the number of sunspots, and on the bottom line is time running, okay? So if you can imagine the line that goes for 400 years, and it shows the number of sunspots. And what you do, you see this up and down cycle, all right? And what they do is, in science, they have these periods of time when the sun went into grand solar minimum, and they give them names. So from basically the 1600s to the 1700s, it was called the Maunder minimum. And if you look at that chart, are you looking at that chart by chance? You see the one I'm saying? Yearly average sunspots from 1610 to 2010, 400 years.
I'm pulling it up right now. Yes, I have it in front
of
me.
Do you see that chart, how it drops off where it says Maunder minimum? See, there aren't any sunspots there. For basically 100 years, they didn't have any sunspots. They might have 5 or 6, just to give you an idea on the number of sunspots that you would have in the maximum, which would be the middle point of the 11-year cycle, like 0, middle point. You would have anywhere from 150 to 200 sunspots going on the sun, okay? And so here you have no sunspot. So what was the weather like in the world? Well, we have records of that. But what I also like to do is I like to tie historical facts to what was going on in the sun. And this is kind of where Coach Dave's thing came in here this year. Because when we went down to the Georgia Guidestones, right, one of the things that we had talked about was the Mayflower Compact, right? But when did the Mayflower Compact take effect? Well, it took effect in, 1620, right? And so we were actually on the Georgia Guidestones on November 11th of 2020, 400 years to the date that the Mayflower Compact was signed. Well, if you go back in your history and you realize, okay, when they left, they were actually headed to Virginia. They weren't headed to New England. But why did they end up there? Well, if you really dig into what was going on, what happens during grand solar minimum is you get more errant, unusual weather, which is what we're seeing on the Weather Channel now. We're experiencing these things because we're getting ready to go. We are in a grand solar minimum. We're at the beginning part of it right now. We're currently in this. And when you have grand solar minimums, I want to give you, these are the signs and symptoms. Remember how I said sunspots are related to somebody's respirations for activity? Let me give you the signs and symptoms of what a grand solar minimum is on the Earth experiencing weather events. Periods of extreme weather in all categories. And can you say that's happening globally? Check. What happened in Texas about a month ago? Coldest time it happened in 100 years, right? Well, in these weather cycles, there's 100-year weather cycles, there's 400-year weather cycles of the sun's activity, there's 800-year cycles, 1,000s, and 2,000-year cycles. They go back in history. And what they saw is they saw that the sun seems to be on these cycles where it starts getting sleepy, tired. It's not producing as much energy over decades of time, over several of the 11-year cycles, 3 or more of them. What's another sign of a grand solar minimum? Record cold and record heat. Listen to all the records. And it's not that we don't. Here's where we get lost in the fuss, right? Everyone will say the weather constantly changes, Craig. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. But the problem that I'm trying to tell you is we're living in the extremes of weather change. In other words, the frequency and the depth of the change is significantly different than it was 25 years ago. We always had tornadoes. We always had hurricanes. We always had bad weather. We always had high years of snow and stuff like that. But what I'm trying to say is when you're under grand solar minimum conditions, which we are at right now, low sun output, low sun activity, you get record cold and record heat. And that's why when this happened in Texas, this does not surprise me. I would expect more of this. And I would expect more of it to happen more frequently and for longer periods of time. What's the next sign? Record droughts. Okay? Record rain. How many floods have you heard about? They got 6 months of rain in one event. If you listen closely, these are the words that are being used to document these large weather events. You go back and you look. Venice was underwater last year. They were sitting on their tables. Venice, Italy, where, you have the nice little boats and everybody's going under the bridges. They were sitting out drinking at tables with their feet under the water. Okay? Multiple 500 and 1,000 year flood events. What happened to the Mississippi River in the winter of 2019? If you go back and you look at it and document, they had to open up floodgates that they never opened up. Okay, with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So it hasn't rained this much in 100 years. Well, how many times have you heard 500-year flood? Okay, this is the kind of stuff you just need to listen to. Record-size hail. How often do you hear about hail these days? So we've always had hail, but it's the frequency and the size of it. Growing seasons become shorter and shorter. Now, you'll appreciate this because I know that you work outside with garden stuff like this. This is what happens in grand solar minimum. Winters and summers extend. Spring and fall contract. In other words, when you're getting ready to go between the change in seasons, winter, you ping pong. All right, that's what we're experiencing right now. Look, we're at March at the last 2 weeks in March. We're getting 80-degree weather, right? You're not supposed to be getting 80-degree weather in March. 50s and 60s, and occasionally we might get a day at 80 here and there. But we're having consistently hot flowers, trees are budding, and all that kind of stuff. What I would expect is I would not be surprised if we don't see another very cold area coming down into the United States, showing off some of the plants. I wouldn't even be surprised where we live in Maryland to get like snow in April. Okay? Because this is what happens during grand solar minimum. You ping pong back and forth. Okay? So what ends up happening is spring, which is when the farmers need this consistent, gentle rise in temperatures to be able to go out and farm and put the plants in, plants don't do well when you go from, 30 degrees to 80 degrees for 4 days, back down to 30-degree days. That shocks their system, okay? But this is what's been happening. And if you go back and you look over the last several years, think about your springs and your falls. Did we really have long springs and falls over the last couple of years? Not really. Last year in Maryland, on Mother's Day on May 15th, we had a hard frost. And where I live, they had peach trees and stuff like that. And a lot of the peach trees got damaged. A hard frost, May 15th, 28 degrees. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but when you start adding this up all across the United States and you start putting all this information in place, these are global events is what I'm trying to say. Okay? So what happens is our growing seasons become shorter and shorter. We have extreme cold winters. Okay, you have bringing into the desert. You have massive electrical storms. And you notice the amount of lightning over the last couple of years, how frequent it is and how strong it is. So you end up in this rain, and the way I like to describe it is if you think about driving your car down the road, right? You got the yellow line, you got the white line. The way they start doing a few years, they start putting these rumble strips in, right? So if you start going into the opposite lane, you hit the rumble strip. If you go outside and you're getting to go outside the road, you hit the rumble strip. What's happening is when we were in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we hardly ever hit the rumble strip. Now, we're not only hitting the rumble strip, we're crossing over the rumble strip. Okay? And this is what Grand Solar Minimum is. These are the weather conditions that have happened. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And have you noticed experiencing that? I mean, you're up in New Jersey and stuff like that. Have you noticed the pinging back and forth? And I think you work with plants and stuff at times, don't you? Greenhouses and stuff.
No, I don't, actually. I think that's probably Stephanie. But
Okay.
Kimberly in the chat room is in Oregon, and she said she had small hail 4 times a couple of weeks ago, and it crushed her baby mustard plants.
Okay. Yeah. If you just start looking at some of these things about record hail, all this kind of stuff, and when I was doing all my research in this, okay, I wanted to make sure I was on the right track, okay? So I'm looking for information not just from one source. I mean, anybody can go to 1 or 2 sources and make a case, right? And it's not about trying to make a case that you're trying to be right, okay? You actually almost want to disprove it. The more you try to disprove what you're trying to bring out, every time you try to disprove it, you end up finding the evidence to prove it. So I came across an article in 2008 that was from a business insurance magazine. It was a business magazine about money. And it talked about how insurance costs for hail in 2008 started skyrocketing. They went over the last 20, 30 years, and they're like, we were spending $500 million a year. Now we're spending like $1.5 billion a year. What's going on? And it's been that way for the last couple of years. So if you look at it, if you go back into the solar cycle and see, our solar cycle ended in 2008, 2009, so we were at Grand Solar Minimum. Right? So solar cycle 24 went from 2009 and it ended in 2019. Okay? And then we have those 11-year cycles, right? So in 2019, we were in the solar minimum, okay? But what we want, if you go back over the last 33 years of solar cycles, which takes you back to like 1985, and you compare the 3 solar cycles together, the sun's activity and output dropped by like 25%. Like that money thing I told you about, right? So now the Earth is starting to react, but you go back and you're like, in 2000, it was global warming, right? Al Gore, 1990s, won the Nobel Peace Prize and all that. But what do we have to do? We couldn't call it global warming because the statistics couldn't back it up. They cherry-pick the statistics on certain heat things, but they don't tell you the whole story. So what's the narrative now? Climate change. See how they slip those words in? Because what people are seeing climate change, and they're seeing these unusual events, but it has nothing to do with CO2. Right? So that's a deception of the enemy. That's tactics of the enemy. He takes something that's actually going on and he misinterprets it. Just like he did in Genesis 3. And he didn't deny what God said. He just said that God really knew what he said. That's basically what he said. He couldn't go back to Eve and say, God didn't really tell you that. No, he just said, did God really say you're going to die? He put that doubt in there. And see, that's how, when you start studying the tactics of Satan, you begin to start being a little more spiritually discerned on how he operates and how he operates in the world. Okay? Right. So did you have any more questions that have come up that I can answer?
So far, no more questions. I think we're good.
Okay. So let's go back to our period of time. From 1600 to 1700, basically didn't have any sunspots. But why did the Pilgrims end up in New England? Well, I think there was a $64,000 question. When you have Grand Solar Minimum, you have more weather, you have more hurricanes. How many hurricanes did Dale have in Louisiana? Remember last year? He said they had 5 hurricanes. They usually get 1 or 2, maybe, Some years they don't get any. But they had 5 that came in. And so what I think happened in the 1600s is, the skipper, the captain of the ship, did not intend to go to New England, but they got blown off course because of what? The company ran into hurricane winds, and they came to the remnants of a hurricane, and it blew them off course. And by the time they could correct and get on course, they couldn't come back down and make it. They were running out of time. That's why the whole thing about Thanksgiving, right? They ran out of supplies, and they needed to park the boat. Because when it was coming, right? And they had to make nice with the Indians to share some food because they didn't have any food. And these were hardened settlers. These were not people that lived on Fifth Avenue. These were hardened settlers that could live off the land. And that first winter came with fierceness. And they couldn't even get their shelter up, and they lived on the boat, and half of them died from malnutrition and sickness. That first year, go back and read about the Mayflower Compact and the Pilgrims. Half of them died. And if you go and you study this whole thing out, and this is where Chapman really did he did this good presentation, and that's why I said, I want to reference him, because if you want to see graphs and stuff like that, I'm telling you, man, this man, he put it all together. But this is what he said about the American history of Jamestown in 1607. Because that's really when this country was settled. This country was settled from England from the 1600s. That's when we started getting a bunch of people coming into this country. Columbus founded it in 1492. So the really story from school, right? But the real impotence of people coming to America was in the 1600s during Grand Solar Minimum, when there were no sunspots. This is what he said: the people who volunteered to travel to the New World and set up a brand new colony were hardened settlers. They knew how to live off the land and were armed with homesteading and survival knowledge that's lost in today's society. Of the first 104 colonists, 38 survived the first winter. Of the 10,000 colonists who left England over the next 15 years, only 20% were still alive by 1622. Do you think they all got scalped by Indians? No. This is very hard weather conditions, I think. They suffered greatly from disease, famine, and conflict with local natives. Why would they be fighting with the local natives if there wasn't a lot of food to go around, right? I mean, if the people that were living there were getting bad harvests, do you think they feel like sharing their food with the people that are coming in on the ships? No. Okay. A starving person's immune system is greatly diminished. And if you start to look at this and you go to the time, Holly, you can go back and study the Black Plague and study the major plagues that killed people, the potato famine in England and all that. When you go back at these really big events in history and you go back and you look at what the sun was doing, there's a direct correlation. Okay?
Yes.
So in a way, I'm not so surprised. This kind of thing. This is intentional. Okay. What I'm just saying is we're in the perfect storm for it to flourish because we're in grand solar minimum, like other plagues in the past have happened. Okay. And so if Jamestown hadn't received a constant supply of replacement colonists to replace those who died, we would never have came over and gotten the colony started because most of them were dying. And there was a weather event that was attached to that. And it's called grand solar minimum.
Wow.
So let's go to another, where are we at on time here? So we're out into, okay. So let's go to another time, all right? Because you're like, okay, hey, even a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So how do you know this thing? How can you show this over time, right? Well, if you remember when you were in Pennsylvania, I showed you about this period of time at the late 1700s to the early 1800s. That's a little bit closer to where we're at. We're talking 200 years, in fact. If you go and you Google Dalton minimum, remember? These minimums of low sun activity have names because they have a period of time where they documented it. And that started happening back in the mid-1750s, 1770s. And it really started taking off around 1780, 1790 because the sun activity did a sharp decline. Okay? One thing to consider this as you start digging into this and you want to understand how the sun is if you think of this 11-year solar cycle, think of a puck tent, right? We're all familiar with the tent, right? You have a stake in the ground, you put a pole right in the middle where you're going to get into the tent, and then you have a stake on the other ground. Well, that would be beautiful if that's how your 11-year cycle and sunspots look like on a graph. It's nice, consistent, make a nice triangle shape and come back down. But what happens is you can have in this 11-year period where the first 3 or 4 years the sun's basically asleep. There's hardly any sunspots. Then all of a sudden it will shoot up like a rocket and go straight up in the air on the graph, okay? Well, that's a shock to our system. That's a shock to the Earth. And the Earth responds that way, and it really affects with the weather and droughts and stuff like that. So this is what happened in 1750s, 1770s. This Dalton minimum ran for about 50, 60 years, okay? In France, if you go back and you look at the history, one of the reasons that Napoleon got in, okay, and that they had this conflict is they didn't have enough food to feed the people. And when people don't have food in their stomachs, they get rowdy. And so they overthrew the government, the king system. Okay, and that's how Napoleon got in, all right? And so Napoleon goes on this conquering stage. He's going to conquer, he's going to conquer the world, right? All right. And that's that chart that I brought to you. I said, okay, let's look at this period of time that happened because there's 4 events that stick out that are all related to the sun. If you just read about them in history and you take the sun out, you're not getting the total picture. Like Paul Harvey always said, page 2, the rest of the story. Okay? So, in the 1800s, one is Napoleon is trying to conquer the world, and he's funding the United States, and we're back at war with England. Okay? We're back at war with England. Right? So Napoleon gets this idea and says, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to take back Soviet, Russia, right? He's going to go over there and take them out. And he makes a march on Russia, all right? So let me just read something that I put together here. And it says, why did Napoleon fail in Russia in 1812? Now, this is the time frame, 1812, all right? One is, Napoleon Napoleon failed to conquer Russia in 1812 for several reasons. He had faulty logistics, poor discipline, and not the least say, the weather. So, to summarize, his logistics were that when he sent his troops out, okay, he didn't send them with all the logistics, all the ammunition, all the food. What his point was, is we're going to conquer this so fast, we're going to take over the crops. We're going to get the food from the land that we get. We're going to get the supplies that we need, okay? So the supplies that were going to be coming from France, they were going to be a little bit further behind than what they're conquering, but that's okay because the land they're going to conquer, they're going to be able to get enough food and everything for that. And so what happened is they outran their supply chain. So to do this, Napoleon would advance his army along several avenues, converging them only when necessary. The slowest part of any army at any time was the supply trains. While a soldier could march 15 to 20 miles a day, a supply wagon was generally limited to 10 to 12 miles a day. To avoid being slowed by trains, Napoleon insisted that his troops live as much as possible off the land. That's great, okay? If everything goes consistently, all right? And so one of the things that hurt him is the people that he was conquering, well, they would just burn it, right? They knew they were going to get conquered, so they would just, what do you do when you get conquered? You blow up the bridges, you burn it, and you try to stop the advancement of the army, okay? But in 1812, when Napoleon invaded Russia, he came in with 600,000 men and over 50,000 horses. And his plan was to bring the war to a conclusion within 20 days by forcing the Russians to fight a major battle. Just in case his plans were off, he had his supply wagons carrying an extra 30 days of food. Reality was a bit different. Napoleon found that the Germans did in 1941 that Russia had very poor roads, so that slowed him down. And so this was forced to advance a very long, narrow front. Even though he allowed for a larger supply train than usual, food was to be supplemented where the soldiers could forage. All right? So there was this supply chain. But then this one factor threw him off. It was the weather. The final factor that really hurt him was the weather. First, it was too hot, making it dry and dusty to march to Moscow. Then when the retreat began, it was too cold at first. This bone-chilling, well-below zero cold that had few experienced before. First to die were the weak who were too exhausted to walk and lay down and died. The food ran out. The strong got weaker and they began to die. But then the weather changed. There was a warm spell which thawed the frozen roads. So remember what I told you. When you're in Grand City minimum, you ping-pong back. You live your weather in the extremes. You get really, really warm days, then you get really, really cold days. It bounces back and forth, okay? And Napoleon, this was all in October and November. They were experiencing like 20 below zero on their way to Moscow in November. You don't usually get those temperatures until January, okay? So the roads froze and the wagon wheel is wet. But what happens when the ground freezes? It gets very, very muddy. That's why farmers can't work the fields, okay, until they unthaw and they dry out. You can't work a muddy field. So the roads turned heavily rutted, but the solids soon turned into quagmires of mud. Streams that were once frozen were quick moving and obstacles had to be overcome. Rivers that could have been crossed without bridges now needed bridges, all of which took precious time and energy, something the Army didn't have. Then once again, the weather took a turn for the worse. This time, far colder than before. Thousands died in their sleep, overcome by exhaustion and exposure. By the time the Army crossed into Poland in early December, we're not talking January, February, we're talking early December, less than 100,000 exhausted cattle troops remained of the 600,000. He lost 500,000 troops. And weather played a...
That's going to hurt. You're going to notice that.
That's going to hurt. Well, it stopped him from conquering the world. If he would have been successful, he probably would have went on and got more land. But God had a different plan. Okay? And I'm saying God probably used the sun as an instrument to slow that plan down that Napoleon had. Because if you study what the French Revolution was and how they persecuted the people in the church, You know, there's a lot about the Roman Catholic Church and the indulgences and all that. You got to get into the history of it. That's where history and weather come in together. Okay. But the weather, the initial problem was there was a famine that overthrew the government, and then Napoleon came into power. Okay, but they tried to change. They hated the church so much they tried to change it from a 7-day week to a 10-day week. They did all kinds of weird sacrifices on the altars in the Roman Catholic Church. You just have to do the history on that. But if you study who the people in the French world, and you know, you get really on here, you talk about the Illuminati and all that other stuff that came out of that period of time. You got several months of shows right there. I'm telling you. But the point being is the weather was a factor in it. So let me show you something here. Let's look at what the sun was doing. And you know, that's why I showed you the chart. And it's a little bit hard to see here because you don't have this data information in front of you. But I showed you there that night. I said, look. I said, do you see these numbers? Do you see how they changed over this 11 years to that 11 years? Okay. So what happened is in 1784 was the beginning of solar cycle 4. Okay, and you would have an average of so many sunspots in the beginning, which was 15.9. Well, in 11 years later, from 1798, that number of sunspots from an average of 15.9 during that beginning phase of solar minimum, it dropped to 5.3. So in one 11-year cycle, I went from 15.9 to 5.3. In 1810, there were no sunspots. You see that cumulative effect I was talking about? It takes, 11 years and 11 years and 11 years. And when did Napoleon take his march? In 1812. During his sunspots, there was no activity. Weather's ping-ponging back and forth. Globally on the Earth. You can go to other countries and look about the weather in the 1800s, and you'll see this is not a isolated event. It's a global event. And so that's why that happened. But let's look at some other things that happen then, too. Do you know the United States suffered one of its greatest earthquakes that it ever had? Do you know what we were talking about that night? Right. It's, but Steve Quayle always talks about the Cascadia, Washington, Oregon, and all that. Okay. Mm-hmm. It just turned on mine. And there's I have to look it up on the computer. That was the year that we had a huge earthquake over in Tennessee. Let me look it up here. What happens, you throw us information in your head sometimes. You can do this on your phone. You got a computer, earthquake 1812.
Sure, I can do that.
Yeah, the New Madrid. They call it the New Madrid, all right? But there, I put in 1812 earthquake and then 18 San Juan Capistrano earthquake, all right? So there was one that they took. But the earthquake of 1812, the New Madrid, all right, it came in a series of earthquakes, large earthquakes, near New Madrid, Missouri, between December 1811 and February 1812. There were thousands of aftershocks, which 1874, of which 1,874 were large enough to be felt in Louisville, Kentucky, about 190 miles away. The number of lives lost from the earthquake remains unknown. However, scholars note the number was probably not great because the region has sparse population. If you go in to read about that, you read about this large ones that came were 7.7s, okay, and that the Mississippi River actually lifted up. The land actually lifted out, and the Mississippi River ran backwards. The president and his wife, I forget, I think it was Darling Madison at the time, they were in Boston. They felt the earthquake in Boston. Okay. And this is what I'm just trying to say. We'll have to get into the magnetism part, you know. Like I said, it's a lot of information. I don't want to relate you with too much information. I just want you to understand that there's a connection to this, okay? That when you have these periods of time when the sun is acting errantly, you have extra volcanoes and extra large earthquakes, just like you have extra large weather events. Okay? So in 1812, we had one of the biggest earthquakes in the United States history. So that's kind of interesting too. The same year that, you know, Napoleon had a problem going to Moscow, right? He's on the opposite end of the earth. Okay, he's just. But you see how these events all kind of come together? Now, in 1814, remember the French were giving us money to fight the British. That's the second time we fought the British in 1815. So, you know, I live outside Washington, D.C. And I remember hearing about when the British actually were inside D.C. They were burning the White House down. They were trying to tear down all the instruments of the new government. And there's like massive tornado. And you can research this too. This massive tornado came through Washington, D.C. It picked up cannons and threw them. It killed more British soldiers than the Americans that were defending Washington, D.C. It rained so hard and heavy, it put the fires of the White House out. And that's a big tornado.
Wow. Pretty cool.
And the British general who was fighting this said, good God, is this the kind of weather you have here, right? The point being is, remember I told you you live in weather extremes during these periods of time?
Yes.
I've lived in Maryland for over 30 years. We've had tornadoes, but you don't have tornadoes like that. That's an extreme tornado, right? If you go back 2 years ago, you can talk to Silver about this. They had an EF3 tornado in Dallas a few years ago. It might be the city of town, the northern part of town, the west part of town. It did a lot of damage. I mean, you always get tornadoes in Texas. I mean, you know, that's not anything new. But you don't get them that big in Dallas, all right? But again, we're in grand solar minimum, just like these other events were happening. So now we've tied three events together within a combination of 2 years, from 1812 to Napoleon, to the New Jersey earthquake, to the Washington, D.C., the big tornado that put the White House out on fire. What happened in 1815? Mount Tambora in Indonesia, a well-known volcano, blew its top. Okay? And what they do is they measure volcanoes by their explosive index. Okay? And a VEI is volcanic explosive index. That's the abbreviation. It had an index of 7. I think it goes to 8. This was the largest.
No.
Mount Tambora, Tambora, if you want to look it up. It happened in 1815. This is a year after Washington, D.C. Okay, this is the point. Right? The largest eruption ever witnessed by man. Not the largest eruption ever, but the largest eruption. It shot a column of ash and debris 141,000 feet. That's big time high. Anything over 70,000 feet, it stayed in the atmosphere. So the person who asked about Revelation 6:12, it says the sun looked like sackcloth. Yeah, do you remember when we used to race with potato sacks? You know, when you had your school at the end of the year? I don't know, maybe you didn't do it. Maybe I'm going back too far. But you had to put a potato sack in two legs and you had to run at the end. You know, what's a potato sack look like? It's it's a mesh netting, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about? Think of taking that mesh netting, okay, or a potato sack, and holding it up to the sun. That's what Revelation 6:20 is saying. It's saying the sun is being obscured. But the sun is being obscured by the clouds. Because what happened is once those particles get up that high, they stay up high. And what they do is they attach to moisture. And you got to have moisture. You have to have something for the water molecule to attach to make a cloud. That's why you pay attention. If you listen to that hurricane season, they'll talk about how much dust is coming off the Sahara in Africa. How much is blowing over. Because the more dust that blows over from Africa that comes over on the Atlantic Ocean, the more particles it is to make clouds and water, which makes hurricanes. That's an important process. You got to have low pressure, you got to have the right steam, all that. But if you don't have the dust, it's like making concrete. If you don't have enough sand and enough this or whatever, plastic, whatever you do to concrete, you're not going to have a structure like that. So what it's saying is particles up high make clouds. So that happened in 1815. But you can go look this up. What happened across the world in 1816? It was called the year without a summer. Because there was nothing but clouds that were up in the upper atmosphere and it blocked the sun. And so people could not make their crops produce in yields. So did they have a sunny day here and there? Yes. But predominantly, they did not have sunny days. They had cloudy days. What do clouds do? They reflect the energy from the sun. So now you got two problems going on here. You got the sun, which is asleep, but there's hardly any sunspot, so it's not really active, it's not really energetic. And you got the clouds reflecting what little bit of sun you do have coming in. You have two converging events happening. And so this is called the year without a summer in 1816. Okay? And they had a hard frost every month in the Northeast. And they had snow, I believe, in July in New England. If you go back and you look, pull it up in Wikipedia, you hear about summer. Okay? And so the crops failed, and there was a famine. And people starved. Okay? And what I'm trying to tell you is those events were not just the luck of the draw. Those were the side effects of what was happening in the sun. Because I'm going to go back to this again. The sun is almost 100% of the mass of our solar system. We're so tiny compared to that. So when the sun has a hiccup, remember I said this at the beginning, when the sun has a hiccup, just little tiny variations, we catch the flu. And so understanding these patterns over history and understanding the correlation of the sun and the earth is very, very important. And so where does that take us today? The bottom line question is, Craig, how does that impact me today?
That is a very good question because I myself would like to know, because some strange things have definitely been happening, and I'm not going to cast any of my speculations on it. But yes, Craig. So how does this affect us today?
Well, for the last 3 solar cycles, the sun has had reduced energy. NASA and the scientists, you can start looking into this if this interests you. Follow some of the channels that the links. They talk about this all the time. It's not like me. I got all this information. This information is out there. It's just people don't understand some of the background. That's what I'm hoping today to do. I'm trying to give you some foundational understanding of what the terms mean and the correlations, and just how important it is to understand that these things over time have had profound effects in our past. And if we're on the trajectory that they're saying is we're going to have the same effects. All right? And so we're going into this other grand solar minimum. And so all these weather extremes are going to continue to get worse. The problem is when you had bad weather extremes in the 1800s, how did people support themselves in the 1800s? Most people grew their own food. They were hardy settlers. I mean, how many people, were involved in agriculture? Now we have 7 billion people on the planet. What's happened to our agricultural industry? Well, we've got a lot of technology. We've been able to produce yields. You can drive that big combine and harvest this and this and this. But what we've done is we've consolidated the areas of farming to certain regions. And if those regions just happen to be in the area of that errant bad weather, that's not a good thing. So let's go back and look. Remember I told you one of the things that got me involved in this is, it's like every time I turned on the weather channel, you had to go and you hear this term, derecho. What's a derecho? Okay. Well, let me read you what a derecho is. One is, in 2012, when I was working in the fire service, go Google the derecho 2012, because I worked it in this Montgomery County, which is outside Washington, D.C. We had straight line winds of 70 to 80 miles an hour for about 25, 30 minutes. This derecho went basically from Ohio down to Georgia. It was a one system front, and all you saw, like on the radar, was nothing but wet. For states, not counties, states. We, in the fire department, we could watch the calls come into the normal wind center. We normally would run 150, 200 calls a day. Within 3 hours, we got 600 calls. We outstripped our resources. So we prioritized calls. There were so many power lines down. We had people on the Beltway in Washington, D.C., if you've ever been down there. Beltways that go around these major cities. We had trees that fell on people on the Beltway that trapped them in their car. Okay. In my first area, after we got through this started about 7 o'clock at night. We were clearing calls until 3 in the morning. These were calls where we really couldn't do anything. I ran 6 to 8 houses that had trees that damaged the house. Some of them they weren't inhabitable. And that was just my little first. There were 30 stations in Montgomery County. That's just my little stations area. That's how powerful these storms are, these derechos. So if you go back into August of 2020 and you type in derecho in Iowa, the derecho that came in there, it had 110 mile an hour winds, I believe it was. These winds come from the atmosphere. They come shooting down like a microburst. You hear microburst. The air currents come down, they hit the ground, and they go horizontal. It blew down 50 to 60% of the corn, the standing corn in Iowa, for the whole state. And we're not talking to county. We're talking about the whole state. And that was one of the best corn crops ever. Okay? So what I'm trying to point out to you is we're going to see shortages in the food system because of this errant weather. And so people need to understand that and start making plans. It's part of that. Food's going to go up big time. Big time. You're going to see, and it's even going to be to the point, and I'm talking possibly this year and the next year, it's not going to be a matter of, it's going to go up. It's going to be a matter of availability of it. And I'm not talking people are going to be starving in the streets. What I'm just trying to say is what you and I are used to. Like we were always used to getting toilet paper until last year, right? That's going to happen with our food. This has to do with the Bible prophecies. All right? What's Matthew say in chapter 24? The signs of the coming of Jesus Christ, right?
Yes.
He says, take heed, let no one deceive you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and deceive many. And you'll hear wars and rumors of wars, and see you're not troubled. Are we hearing about wars and rumors of wars? Did he say Ukraine? Did he say South China Sea? Did he say Iran? I mean, okay. But there's always been wars. You're right. And so we can't build our theology on that, because how many wars is there? There's always been wars. There's always been bad weather. But what I'm trying to point out, there's a convergence of what the Lord was saying to us. And they're all going to start converging at one time. Okay? Then he would say, see, you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And there will be various, there will be famines, pestilences. Have you heard about all the locusts? You know, the food up in Egypt, around India, they were getting ready to go to China. See, I keep track of all this information because I've made myself aware of it. Most people don't do that because they don't, it's just another piece of information. It doesn't seem like it matters. But it does matter because all these pieces are all integrated together here, okay? And there's going to be earthquakes in various places. And what did I just tell you? There was an earthquake in 1812, right? And then we should go back and look at the other. There's these big volcanoes that went off. Remember how in the last 2 years ago in Hawaii they had a volcano that went for in Kilauea for 2 months? It just kept shooting lava out. Okay, and the reason that this is happening, and we'll have to get into this in the next one because I don't want to overload you with too much information.
No, you're doing fine, Craig.
Is if you're familiar, if you've ever charged a car battery before, okay, and you're always supposed to charge it at like low voltage for a period of time, but you can overcharge a battery by charging it longer than it's supposed to be charged, or if you're putting too much energy in it, okay. And what will happen is the battery will overheat and it will crack, okay? Because what happens when you heat something up? It expands, right? And so what's happening here is it's not so much that we're getting, we haven't even talked about the magnetic field yet. That's another thing that we got to take into consideration what's going on here. But what's happening is our poles, our north and south poles, are pulling in electromagnetic energy from the sun and from galactic energy around from other star systems because our magnetic field is shrinking, okay? So basically what you have is you have all this energy and it's going into the core of the Earth, okay? And it's being stored there and it's heating it up. So I want you to think of something. I think if you made this nice apple pie with this nice crust, right? All right, and you put it in the microwave. Well, what's the microwave do? The microwave goes in and it heats up that apple filling, right? And as it gets hot, what does it do? It tries to expand, right? And so it's going to push on that pie crust until there's some sort of fissure, right? And then if you keep heating it up in the microwave, it's going to like squirt that pie filling, it's going to hit the inside of your microwave, right? That's what's going on right now at the Earth. The Earth is receiving all this energy inside its core, and it's heating up the magma that's inside. And when that gets heated up, it has to find a point of releasing it. So it finds it along the different continental lines, all right, where we have different continental plates meeting each other, or the San Andreas Fault, where you have fault lines. And it shows up in volcanoes. Volcanoes are like a pressure relief system to the core of the Earth. So when you hear about a lot of volcanoes going on, for big volcanoes, this isn't about Mount Etna. Oh yeah, Mount Etna's going. how do you know that much? No, 100 years. But pay attention to the time frame that they're talking about. It hasn't happened in 400 years. That's interesting. Remember, the modern man was happening in the 1600s. Okay? But the point that I'm just trying to say is these events are going on, and that's why you're going to see increased earthquakes and volcanoes. But the Lord used that as one of his reference points. But he also referenced famines. He also referenced discord amongst the people. Okay? So it wasn't just like one data point, it was several data points. And then you throw the nation of Israel in, you throw in the Abraham Accords, the Trumps, and Jared Kushner's, and the home against Solomon, you get into the politics of it, and this, and I'm telling you, there's a lot of factors that are pointing to this period of time that Matthew 24 said, look up as your redemption draweth nigh. And the relationship of what's going on in the sun is going to be one of those things. So the scientists are saying is the sun's going to be cooling until about 2050. And then it's going to pick back up. But remember, it could start picking back up in 2050, but it might take to 2100 before we start feeling the effects of that. All that big pot of spaghetti water I was telling you about takes a long time to go up. Takes a long time to go down. Okay? Right? Just get that mental image in your mind, okay? So even if the sun just started saying, you know what, Craig, I'm going to change tomorrow. I repent for not working like I should, and I'm going to start acting good tomorrow. By the time I felt the effects, I'm 60, I'll be dead. Because I live an average male's life of 76 or so in America.
Don't say that.
So, the point that I'm just trying to say is one, the biggest thing is don't have this fear. Because these could be very depressing things to talk about. And usually when I talk to people about it, and I presented this in my church, people have cognitive dissonance.
Yes, they do. Because
the problem is it's not like they don't necessarily don't like me, they don't like what I'm saying, and then what they don't like is, like, you saw how many papers I brought with me. And I didn't I could have stayed there another 2 hours and showed you papers about money. Okay.
I would love to. I would love to.
Well, I mean, one day will be a chance. But the point that I'm just trying to say is, I'm not, like a big writer of a book that goes out and they write a book and they're trying to convince you of something, or at least explain something to you. They footnote what they're saying. I mean, a book that doesn't have many footnotes is really a lot of liberty whoever's writing the book. What I'm just trying to say is, everything that I'm bringing to you, I can bring you back to a science article or a point in history that I've researched. And I can tell you that I'm not making a correlation that does not have a cause and effect. All right? Because that's something that when I was going through this, I had to say, sometimes when you start, you think, wow, I found something, or you're writing on this and this and this and this. You keep going there and you're just thinking, wow, you want to, find more to kind of confirm what you're doing, And what I want, like I said, what I want to do is I want to say, okay, well, this isn't very pleasant, so I would really like to be wrong. So I kept looking for things to disprove it. But the more I kept to look to disprove it, the more I found articles to prove it. And I thought, wow. And what I'll do is I'll send you also a link later, and you can put this on there. There's a gentleman named John Casey, and he was in charge of the earthquake awareness and volcanic explosion. I forget he used to work for NASA and stuff like that. He wrote a book called Dark Winter, and he went to our people. And he does an interview with one of the people from the Grand Solar Minimum Channel, which is one of the links, Jake and Maury. Okay. And he does an hour. And you can listen to him talk. And what he talks, he really gets into about the cycles. And you can buy his book. I think you can go on Amazon for $15. And you can read his book. And he has all the documentation. And, what you begin to see, and it's kind of like what he did, is as he started finding this out, 15, 20 years ago, he just kind of sat there and he just talked about it. He says, this is really not good. This is depressing, But the point that he said is, do I not say anything, or do I tell people? And do I challenge them intellectually to verify what I'm saying? Remember, President Reagan had that great saying, trust but verify. And what I want to do is I want you to intellectually challenge me and show me what I'm doing is wrong. And say, Craig, I think you're wrong about this. Yes. Craig, I think you're wrong about that. Because I think if you honestly do that, I think you'll come in and you'll find out what I'm saying is probably more right than wrong.
I agree.
And the thing that I want you to know is the biggest part of this is we need to be walking with the Lord Jesus Christ. Because, grand solar minimums have happened a long time in history. The Lord knows how to do that. Actually, I believe that the whole story of the Passover, the plagues, that happened on Egypt, that had to do with the grand solar minimum. The flood had to do with things that were going on in the sun, causing these major events. We talked about before the show about pole shift. We haven't even gotten into a pole shift, Isaiah 24, where Isaiah sees the earth teeter and totter like a drunkard. Okay, what does that mean? Well, the earth is getting ready to go through a pole shift just like the sun does. But that's going to have very profound effects on our planet and our climate. Okay, and that's when God's talking about judging the earth. And that's why I think we're not appointed for that type of judgment. Okay, we might go through hard times, but we're not under the wrath of God. All right, that's for the people that hate God. So the point of this is really is get you walk with the Lord. Make sure you're saved. Make sure that you're walking with Jesus. And you know what? He's going to take care of you through the storm. He has. He has in the past. He promised. He said he'd never leave you or forsake you. Okay? That's something you can stand on. And so, he's going to make us go through the storm. I mean, I think at one point he's going to take us out of here. That's my personal opinion on this, If these things are trajectorying of that, it's not really appointed to us. It's appointed to the world in general. But the thing that I'm just trying to say, what can you do right now? Start putting aside some food, start learning how to grow some of your own food, start making some contacts with some of the local farmers. So say you're in this area, it's like, well, geez, I have a 10 by 10 square piece of that. And I don't have 2 acres of land to grow my own food. All right? Find some of the local people who produce local produce. Find someone who sells your own meat, a farmer. Okay? Like where I'm at. I buy beef from people that have dairy farms or cows. They raise their own cows. So I'm already hooked into a source. See? A local source. And start establishing these relationships now. Because what you'll find is when things get tight, everybody's going to start thinking at the same time, okay, well, I can't get the toilet paper over here, but I thought, this is what I would do. It was just like Pop Brand Supermarket, right? Like nobody ever shopped at because it was like drip, I'd say a lot. And so when you didn't have the toilet paper at the supermarket where, like Martin's a really nice one that has all the displays and everything, if you went over there, they never ran out of toilet paper because people never shopped it there. So what I'm trying to say is these are the kind of things that you can do that are going to be able to help you weather through the storm, right, and protect your family. And also, in a way, it would be a little witness and say, hey, I saw these things coming because guess what? The Bible talks about it, and let me show you. I'll show you here and here, and this is how it was interviewed, and, and they'll say, wow, maybe I need to take the Bible a little bit more seriously because we should, because it's God's Word. So, but what we can do is maybe next time, Holly,
yes,
we're going to talk about the electromagnetic connection between the sun and the earth, and that kind of ties into some of the things that you and Stephanie talk about, and Mark Trump and stuff like that, because there is this connection. Okay, we need to understand that. There's an electromagnetic connection between the sun and the earth. And also with the other stars and planets. Because I'm going to just give you a little teaser for next week. The earthquake that occurred on December 26, 2004, where, if you remember seeing the images, where this great wall of water just came up on these people that were enjoying Christmas vacation in Indonesia. The water just came up, and you saw it. It killed I think 200,000 to 300,000 people. Okay, it was one of the top 10 worst natural disasters in Earth's history. That was caused by us getting energy from from an imploded star, a magnetar called magnetars, star that's imploded. Okay, you call it a dark star, whatever. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about it. That happened 7,500, or I'll have to go back and look at, just to say offhand, 20,000 light years away. Wow. It took a long time. It took a long time to get here. Okay. But guess what? It hit the Earth. The energy hit the Earth that day, and that's how the Earth responded. You have in Indonesia on the fault line, okay, we all know the fault line, right, where we have two different plates there. You had 750 miles along the fault line shoot up 40 feet in the air. So let's build a model in our mind, right? Most people are familiar with 70 West. It's a big interstate system. It goes from like Baltimore to Los Angeles. 750 miles is from like Baltimore over to like Indianapolis, Indiana, in distance. Think of taking the interstate system that far and shooting it up 4 stories in the air. And then think of all the water that's above that within the Indian Ocean. That's what caused that tsunami.
Wow.
It came from energy from a magnetar. But people don't talk about that.
I'm glad we're going to talk about it, though.
You're right, we are. We're going to talk about that, okay? And I'm going to give you some reference some of the articles that you can read about what this gentleman's hypothesis on what is going on. But that's the in-depth study that I've done on this, okay? I'm not telling you I'm an expert on it, but I'm telling you I've researched this. And there's connections to this, okay? And but we're also going to talk about Bible prophecy.
Yes.
All right? And we're going to talk about how this all ties into the book of Revelation. And we're going to talk about this thing called wormwood. Tom Warren's done that. It was really neat that Tom Warren did that, because you know what? That was confirmation, because he did that after I did my presentation about wormwood.
Nice.
Which is coming in 2019.
I can't wait to hear your presentation. Oh, I am so amped.
Yeah. So, anyways, did you have any more questions? Is there something that I didn't explain clearly that needs any further explanation?
I think we're good so far, but when people go to listen to this podcast later on, and should they have questions, they can email them to Holly Bags, HOLLY, B as in boy, A, G as in girl, S as in Sam, 11 at protonmail.com, and we can address them next time that you come on, Craig. But I'm really looking forward to next week. And is there anything else that you'd like to add?
The only thing I'd say is, if this is piques your interest, okay, and you want to understand this more, and you're already on your way, but you want to go back over it, I'd love for you to listen to the show. But I really want to shoot you over to Chapman, where I sent a link, right? Because he did a really great presentation. And he explained this, and he had the charts and all the other stuff, you know. And sometimes this stuff you got to hear a couple times. I mean, you kind of get it, but it's the difference between watching football, to playing, being a team player on football, to being like Coach Dave, to coaching football.
Yes.
You know, there are three different levels to that. Okay, and so I would recommend sending you over to him. He has a short version and he has a long version on his website. Okay, so if you want to find out more, I'm telling you, if you go through that and kind of listen to what I did, you're going to be a lot further ahead than what you realize on this. And so when I talk about it next week, you're going to be good. You're going to be good to go on some of this electromagnetic things that we'll be talking about.
Sounds good. I am so excited. So, my love to FringeRadioNetwork.com and all of our listeners. And hang on the phone with me for a second, Craig. But without further ado, thank you. Thank you. That was my special guest, Craig Mickel. Thank you. Sorry.
Are we off there?
Hold on one second.